to Spain on a fake visa or something like that. And then we waited in Spain till we could get into the States, and then we stayed.
Yeah, really. So what were some of your first impressions of being in the U.S. and how did you start to assimilate?
Um, wow. My first impressions of the United States was that it was very clean. And I also felt at the same time that nothing had changed. Like I think that when you're a kid, you expect that if you go to another country, it's going to be this really tumultuous change. But my life didn't change that much, you know. It wasn't until later when I look back that I realized how different it was. But kids can adapt very easily, and I think that having spent that time in Madrid, that was the big change. You know, that's where I saw snow for the first time, and I saw a more industrialized country than Cuba was or my part of Cuba was at the time. So coming to El Monte, California, was kind of a non-event. Um, so I adapted pretty well. I had cousins here, hundreds of them, already living in the same apartment building. Everybody spoke Spanish. I learned English really fast, like in 3 months. I was fluent because my cousins already knew it. And so, in order to understand what they were saying about me, I needed to learn really fast. So, but I liked America right away. I think the reason it wasn't so dramatically different is because the weather in California is so similar to the weather in the States. Um, in Cuba. I knew I had said something. This is why writers get rewritten. So the weather wasn't all that different. My cousins were all there. My uncles and aunts were all there and so forth. So it really wasn't that dramatic a change. I do remember thinking that American children were a lot more immature than Cuban children somehow. At the time, I remember that I had to sort of dumb myself down a little bit to fit in. Because in Cuba, you're expected to have bigger responsibilities as a kid, maybe because of the way the country is, you know, the way they were raised. So I do remember that I was 10 and they were 10, and I felt like they were 5.
Wow.
Weird, huh?
Yeah. So your process of learning English, your English amazes me. Your vocabulary and the images that you write down. So I have some quotes here from Midnight Rumba. That just really stood out to me. And It's just so beautiful. It's poetry.
Yeah.
The images that you have. Let's see. If I were writing about a certain scene, I might say, like, you know, the road was wet and shiny. Maybe I would have said something like that. But he says, he kept his eyes on the drenched highway that had turned into a wet funhouse mirror. Who comes up with that stuff? Apparently him. And then another one I love is, he spoke in a voice as intimate as the rustling of bed sheets.
What could be more intimate than that?
I love that. So, I mean, I'm wondering, as a writer, because I'm not a writer, so as a writer, how do you experience the world? Is it in images? Do words come to you? How do you experience the world as a writer?
The reason I write the way I do is that I think that most stories have already been told, and that all I have is hopefully a new voice, a fresh way of looking at things. So I work really hard at that. It's not something that I don't automatically sit down and write the way you just read. You know, I mean, I just have to look at the same sentence and paragraph over and over and over again until I can find a really unique way of saying it. And I think the reason that I have that ability now is that I fell in love with the English language. I've always been interested in what's exotic, and to me, you guys were exotic. So, you know, I mean, I was fascinated by, you know, TV dinners and Coca-Cola in a can, and, you know, things that you would think mundane were really exotic to me. And your language was exotic to me, and so I really wanted to excel at it. I love all the possibilities of English, and I really started reading a lot of American writers, and then I started reading the Latin American writers, and I saw what they were doing with language. So I thought, if I can do with language in English what they're doing with language in Spanish, I may have a chance of being a good writer.
And how old were you when you started? I mean, have you known you were a writer since, you know?
No, actually, I know that in our society it's forbidden to have regrets. You know, like the minute you say to somebody, "Oh, I have this regret," they go, "Never regret anything. You only have this moment. You only have today. You can only move forward." But you know what? I have a regret. No, I have a bunch, but nobody lets me tell them. I regret that I didn't take myself more seriously as a writer earlier on. But it was a process of maturation. It was a process of believing in myself, of giving myself permission. Giving myself permission to be poor, for example. Giving myself permission to fail. Giving myself permission to put myself in a position where I am going to be judged. You know, because people read your books, and then in the olden days, they had to let's say that a reader didn't like your book. They would consider writing you a letter. And they would have to write it they would have to find a pen and a piece of paper and an envelope and a stamp. Then there was no way that you could reach a writer. You would have to send it to their publisher. And hopefully maybe the publisher would send it on to the writer. Now they email you, they Facebook you, like if they have a thought, like they go, "Oh, this book really stinks," they just go, "This book really stinks." And you immediately hear from them, you know? So you put yourself in a position like that. It takes a lot of courage. I always say that, and I have some students that are here. Thank you for coming. And I say that in class all the time. It takes a lot of courage to be a writer. It doesn't just take talent. It doesn't just take a good story. It doesn't just take, you know, workshopping and whatever. It takes a lot of courage. And that is why doing the Idyllwild Authors Series is such a pleasure for me, because I want to celebrate these people who have traveled that road and who have tested that courage in themselves to become writers.
When you left Cuba, your family home was left and taken over by other people, and we've talked about that. And you seem to have such an acceptance about it. And in fact, you went back to Cuba a couple times. You've been back and seen your house and said hi to the people who live there. And
the house we got here is better. It's got hot and cold running water. The house in Cuba, you know, for our bath, my mom had to heat a pail of water, you know, and make the water tepid and so forth. And we you know, because everybody assumes that everybody that is from Cuba is from Havana, and I'm not from Havana. Gustavo's from Havana, right? And I think Carlos is over there. I got a couple of Cuban immigrants here. They snuck in. But you know, I come from a very small town, very similar to the town in Tomorrow They Will Kiss. You know, it was very primitive. It didn't have a sewer system. You know, like it had trenches that the water came out of the houses. God knows what was in it. It just went to the sea. We lived really close to the sea. We lived in a seaside village, you know, where what I wouldn't give to live there today, because I love the sea, but everybody just took the sea for granted. So I do have some attachments to that house, in a way. I went back to that house in 1997 after being away for more than 20 years. And it was weird because the house has not been touched. It was exactly as we left it. The telephone was still there, the couch was still there. This woman and her disabled son live in the house now. The government, when you leave the country, the government assigns families to live in your house. And she saw me standing outside, and she said, did you used to live here? And I said, yeah. And she said, would you like to this kind of emotional. She said, would you like to see your house? And she took me inside, and my brothers, our beds had the same bedspread that we had left.
Wow.
Yeah, it really was bizarre. And she was very nice about it, and she said, I'm keeping it nice for you if you ever need it back. And, that's not the case with every Cuban whose house has been, taken over. I mean, most people, like, when I went to my grandfather's house on that same trip, and they would let me near that house, and my grandfather had the big house, and it had been subdivided. There were several families living there, and me showing up was like the devil showing up. I mean, they really just get away. So, the whole experience of having a country being taken over by another person, and nationalized, and all your property being taken away from you and stuff is, it's hard. It's not as hard for me as it is when I see the experience through my parents' eyes, and that's sort of the eye that I try to write with.
I didn't know we were gonna cry.
You did.
I do. So,
I don't mind crying. You know why I don't mind crying? Because I don't mind laughing. You know how I laugh all the time? Just an emotion, right? So if something touches me, I'll definitely get a little weepy. But I also have the ability to laugh so much, So I'm a happy person.
You
even though
are.
I'm a sensitive person.
if you say so yourself.
If I say so myself.
So, Midnight Rumba.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I love the richness of place and the way you describe it. You can feel the heat.
Hold your applause.
You can feel the heat and the fire of the city, and the characters are so full, and their backstories. I love seeing where someone is now and then seeing why they are the way they are. Beautiful, beautiful. Which character in the book would you say that you most identify with?
Aspirina,
I figured as much. Tell us.
the obese dancer.
Yes.
There's something about her. If you guys haven't read the book yet, it's one of the characters is called Aspirina, which basically means aspirin, and with one extra R, and she's a 350-pound woman who is determined to be a modern dancer like Isadora Duncan, and her struggle is the struggle of every artist. I mean, if it's not your size, it's in here or it's whatever. So I definitely identify with her. And what's really great about her, she's really, really feisty. She's I mean, no matter what, she gets booed off the stage every time she performs, and she gets on that stage every night. And she fights for her place in the dance company, and she fights for everything she gets, and she lies, and she
And that's the one you relate with.
Yeah, she lies and she conspires and whatever.
Uses
Yeah,
people to get where she is.
she does. Yeah. There, she's in the truck, and they go, well, no, I mean, what we need is a nurse, not a dancer. She goes, oh, I'm a nurse.
Now I see why you relate with her. Yes.
So yeah, I love her. I think that she's one of the reasons I kept going back to the book, because it took me 9 years to write it, and so it was hard sometimes to go back to it. Sometimes you just wanted to bury it, burn it, and she kept me going back because I wanted to see how she was going to end up.
You say 9 years to write it. Was it something that emotions would come up for you and you need to put it aside, or was it just life?
No, I just couldn't get the first 100 pages to work. The other 800 pages were fine.
Isn't that kind of a common thing, though?
Yeah,
In writing?
I suppose so. And that's why, again, when I teach, I tell them, let's get these first 50 pages right. If you can get this first 50 pages right, the rest of it is going to be a joyride. So we work on that a lot.
And
because,
it is.
and it was difficult for me. I mean, the first 100 pages, you have to set up everything. So,
Yeah, and
after that, it's just a matter of creating adventures for them to have.
Oh, that's interesting. I know a writer, and he was writing a crime scene thriller, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm not a writer, so I don't know how these things work.
Right.
So he said he's writing, and he kind of knew the story and how it's going to go, and he's writing, and then the detective, opens the door to the hot box, and there was a different person sitting there than the writer thought was going to be there. Like, the book revealed to him who was in that room. And does that happen to you? Like, the story all of a sudden, like, is revealed to you that you didn't expect, like a twist comes?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that happens. But what happens more frequently along those lines is that the story wants to go in a different direction. And you have to harness it back. You have to go, no, I'm not going to go that way, because if I go that way, I'm going to get lost. So the process is always bringing it back to the through line that you need in order to have your ending.
Right.
But there are surprises. It's just such a, it all happens in your head. It's such a weird thing, to be a writer. So yeah, you get surprises. You get surprises in terms of, for example, let's say that you type a question, and then the answer that comes is a surprise.
Right, because the character is telling you.
Because the character is telling you what to write.
Right, that just freaks me out. That's amazing.
It freaks me out too.
I want to be in control of my mind, which never works anyway. I've already got enough voices going on in there. I better not be a writer.
Yeah,
Too many more.
it freaks me out too. And it freaks you out in particular when you're writing literary fiction or the kind of fiction that I write. Like if you're writing the kind of fiction that is, let's say, more popular fiction or genre fiction, romance novels or crime novels and so forth. They have their value and certainly make a lot more money than the kind of fiction I write. But I think that that's less of a head trip than when you're writing the kind of stuff where you have to go so deep.
Yeah.
It's a crazy thing to do.
I know.
And I didn't know that. I didn't know when I decided to become a full-time writer how it was going to change me. That it was going to change me so completely in the way I view the world, the way I view myself, how I think, that I think in stories, that I have lots of voices in my head, that I don't have just voices in my head, but I have strangers in my head. Like, what are you doing here? And it scared me at first. I would be sort of like that time just before you fall asleep, and I would have like this whole thing going on in my head that felt so real that it was like a television show. And I thought, okay, it's finally happened. People said I would lose my mind, and I have. And then I thought, oh my God, you've trained your mind to create stories. And now it's just a matter of telling your mind when to create those stories, because sometimes it's not appropriate.
Right. Well, I think that's a great segue to have you read something.
Mm-hmm.
I would really enjoy that.
Okay.
And I think they might too.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Oh, all right.
give us a little taste.
So, Midnight Rumba, in a way, is a story about a young woman named Estelita de la Cruz who grows up with her father, who's a rumba singer. And I hope you enjoyed the mojitos that Aroma provided for everybody. Her mother died when she was born, and so it's just her and her father. And her father's kind of an irresponsible man, and he leaves her alone in hotel rooms all the time when she's little. He leaves her alone when she's an infant, and she doesn't know it, of course. But as she gets older, she starts to realize that after she falls asleep, her dad goes out. He goes out drinking and whatever. One of the big things that happens in this novel is that there's a hurricane, as there are very, frequently in that part of the world, and this is the reason I wanted to read this part is because it has that voice that we were talking about. I mean, I know when I'm using it, like I know when it works, or I hope it works for you guys, but it works for me. So it goes like this: Estelita de la Cruz would not remember the hurricane for what it did to the land and the people, or for the howling winds that she feared would tear the hotel from its foundation and send it hurling into space. She would not remember the hurricane because it came shortly after her 10th birthday and struck with a force that she didn't think possible, or for the torrents of inky water that rushed down the street to meet the sea and flood the town. She spent those long days watching through a crack in the wooden shutters as things floated down the street, cars, bicycles, bloated bodies, couches, dinner tables, chairs, wooden boxes, and a million small objects she could not identify in the gray light. In her lifetime, bigger and more destructive hurricanes would sweep through Cuba, storms of such unprecedented fury that they would be given the names of women. Flora, Hilda, Eloise. She would remember this particular hurricane because it changed the course of her life, the way hurricanes were known to change the course of a river, the shape of a coastline. You want more? Oh, all right. Sorry. She didn't expect anyone to look in on her, not Lucido the magician, who was only a few doors down, or the triplets who were surely huddled in the room across the hall, not even Aspirina Ramagosa, the dancer whose room shared a wall with hers. At the time, she kept her father's secret, an unspoken pact between them that excluded everyone else. She liked it that way, because she believed it strengthened her ties to him. No one needed to know that her father left her alone when he went out. She made sure no one knew that she spent her nights by herself in hotel rooms. Not that anyone would have cared. She knew that most of the performers were like her father, unattached and unsentimental. They came and went with the seasons, had no family to speak of, and if they did, they never spoke of them. They had traded domesticity for fleeting moments of glory in the dim limelight the sabrosuras afforded them. She would remember that it was November 11, 1949, a Thursday, when the storm hit shore, and that she had got into bed and pulled the covers over her head, and that when that didn't help, she took her blanket and pillow and crawled under the bed. She remained under the bed, imagining she was a puppy in a box, safe and snug from harm. She would remember the darkness and the furious sound of the wind. Most of the time, her mind was a jumble of indecisions. Should she get out and get help? She wondered if any of the other guests at the hotel would take her in. But she was too paralyzed with fear to risk getting out from under the bed, let alone leave the room. The first time she wet herself, she wept with quiet shame. The second time didn't matter. By then she was too exhausted and kept willing herself into a blank sleep. No thoughts, no fears. She was beyond fear. Then all was just quiet. More than quiet. There was no sound at all. The storm had stopped as mysteriously as it had begun. She made her way to the window slowly, looking for him in the dark. She saw the twisted trees lying helpless and uprooted, the wet and frightened people slogging through black mud looking for their loved ones. She felt a shuddering fear that wouldn't go away, and visions, ugly ones, much too ugly for any little girl. Whenever she closed her eyes, she saw her father's nose and mouth filling with filthy water as his arms and legs flailed, the jerky movements of the drowning man only causing him to sink deeper. She shook her head to dismiss the unpleasant thoughts and cleaned herself up, changed into a fresh dress, rinsed the soiled one, got ready for his return. She knew he would, he had to, and when he did, she ran to him and he lifted her into his arms. He held her tight. He smelled sour with booze and sweat and smoke, but that was familiar and comforting to her. It smelled like Papa.
Yeah.
We're done. I think our work here is done. That's amazing. I think that's the first thing you sent me to read.
I moved myself.
You can clean up later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing you sent me to read, and those images. I just, of course, I wanted more and more. I love it so much. So, you talk about the hurricane and the day of the hurricane. Obviously, you did, a lot of research.
Well, I lived through hurricanes like those.
Yes.
When I was in Cuba.
Yes, but not that exact particular one. So there's another section. Where did I mark it? That I would like for you to read.
Oh, wow.
I know.
I'm reading.
You're going to be reading, baby. Well, question would be, is there a character in the book that is based on your dashingly handsome betrothed?
Mark Davis.
I asked Mark to give me some questions that I might ask. I think I got that right.
You see how writing is a humiliating profession?
Come on. Maybe, There's
No,
a love thing in there that.
You know what's really interesting about Mark, in terms of this book, is that Mark has been with me through the whole 9 years that it took to write the book, and Mark read it and made notes because Mark's a really good editor. When the book was 840 pages, when it was really difficult to read, when it was not perfect, and he always encouraged me to continue working on it. So that's how he figures in the book, and it's dedicated to him. So he figures in the front page,
What can I say? Yes.
and to my father as well.
For Mark Davis, it is there, and for my father.
Yeah.
So tell me about dedicating it to him.
I dedicated the book to my father almost as an afterthought, and I dedicated it to my father rather than to my father's name, which is the same as mine, because I think that my father will go to his grave believing that he was robbed of a life by the revolution.
Yeah.
And this was a small way of me to give him back a little something, you know. It was just something that I thought would be nice. He doesn't read English, so he's never going to read this book.
Wow.
He only marginally understands that I'm a writer of novels, but it was for me. It was my gift to him to thank him for, you know, my life.
Beautiful. So, this, what page is it? 199. This is a scene that I just loved reading, and I'm assuming it's based on a real event. It's the march and the heel clicking.
Oh, right. All right.
That's a
So.
real event.
So it's a little bit of a real event. As a matter of fact, what she's talking about is when a lot of young men were during the revolution taken away. Mothers would take the streets in demonstrations, and they are still doing that today. That they call damas en blanco. They dress all in white and take to the streets.
But don't tell
in
them what they
protest.
do, because that to me was cool when it's revealed.
So,
in this section.
inspired by them, I created this because this is historical fiction with emphasis on fiction.
Okay, so what I did, I hope this isn't insulting, but,
You skipped around?
well, to read here and then go to there.
Sure.
Can you skip that paragraph?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, I just don't want to edit out something precious.
All right, Aspirina, my favorite character, right? So, another reason that the book wasn't working is because my protagonist was boring. I had to make my protagonist more interesting, and she's not it. This is a secondary character, but she was more interesting than the protagonist.
And that's why you relate to her.
Aspirina was wet, angry, and tired when she entered the convent. The march had been a resounding success, thanks in large part to her efforts, she thought. She had remained at the front of the crowd, her arms linked with the women on either side of her, and theirs in turn linked with hundreds of other women. They had entered the plaza slowly. The presidential palace loomed above them. She could see the long shuttered windows and noticed that some of the lower ones were covered with sandbags. She could see the military tanks and guards. The sight had thrilled her. She enjoyed a formidable foe. But when the rest of the women saw what they were up against, when they saw the armed guards, the rifles aimed at them, they slowed down, almost to a standstill, as if an invisible shield was keeping them from moving forward. Their voices quieted. Fear reigned in everyone's heart, everyone but hers. Aspirina continued walking forward, pulling the other women along. Some of them unlaced their arms and started moving backwards. Their faces twisted into masks of fear and confusion. But the women in the back couldn't see what was happening at the front, so they continued marching forward, thrusting the reluctant ones towards the front entrance of the palace. Aspirina found herself up against the rifles. A few more steps and she would have had a barrel poking into her chest. Step back, the soldiers barked, baring their teeth like rabid dogs. Step back! The front row stopped, and some of the terrified women turned to those behind them. Stop pushing, they shouted at each other. Stop! Finally, the mass of bodies came to a nervous standstill. Hilda Llorente turned to Aspirina, her eyes anxious. Now what? She whispered. We should kneel down and pray, a woman suggested in a whisper. Oh, they would love that, shouted Aspirina. Let's give them something better. And with that, she started clicking her heels on the cobblestone street. Hilda joined, and then the women to her left, then to her right, and then the row behind, and on, until every woman was clicking away. It was a marvelous feminine sound, a powerful one. The clicking gave way to shouting and waving of placards and flags. They were not moving forward, but they were a force to be reckoned with. Aspirina looked around. All sorts of people, men in plaid shorts, women in flower dresses and sunglasses, holding children by the hand, came running into the plaza to participate in the excitement. The women in black found their voices again, and she joined in, never once taking her eyes off Talente. Is that where I'm supposed to skip to?
No.
From here to here. Okay, all right. Talente. Yeah, because she doesn't. Because what happens here? Hold on, Betty. I know what to do. What happens is that when the women are down there clicking their heels, Aspirina looks up at the presidential palace and she sees this man named Juan Carlos Talente at one of the windows. And she suddenly realizes that this man is in cahoots, our word, with the government. And so she says, his name is Talente. The women in back found their voices again and she joined in, never once taking her eyes off Talente. Mujeres unidas no serán vencidas, they chorus. Women united will never be defeated. Their voices were strong, loud, and angry. She could feel the energy course through her body, something akin to power, the power of voices united. And then, without warning, the fire trucks had flown in like a red and evil wind and blown it all to hell. Most of the women ran shouting and shrieking. Others, like herself, remained firm against the streams of water. And when the police arrived and started arresting women, roughly grabbing their arms and legs and tossing them into waiting vans like sacks of potatoes, she knew it was time to get out. Aspirina scurried through the crowd, as slippery as a greased pig. Women reached out to her, but she couldn't help them. She continued on fast as her little legs could carry her until she found a narrow alley through which she made her escape. She could hear the screams and sirens for blocks afterwards. She was grateful that she did not hear shots, and she was even more grateful when she reached the back door of the convent. Big action scene.
I know. Isn't it so exciting?
So yeah, so it's my view of a revolution that I was too young to actually witness. So in so many ways, this is a fantasy. This is in no way it has historically accurate tone, except that most of the events that are actually historical did take place, and I had to adjust my stories so that those events actually fell on the days that those events took place. I mean, there is no way to get around the fact that on January New Year's Eve 1959, the president left the country. I mean, there was no way that I could say, oh, he actually left in the spring. Yeah, so I had to write the book to coincide with those dates.
So that heel clicking thing is not like an event that happened.
No.
Because that to me, I was like, oh, he must have researched this heel, because nobody could make that up. Right, well, I guess somebody did. I mean, I love it, so powerful, the heel clicking thing. I love it.
No, those demonstrations didn't include heel clicking necessarily, but
I just loved it.
it's what the scene needed. So I put it in there. That's right.
So, you went to Cuba when you were finishing up the book. Did that make any revisions, or how did that inform the book?
Oh, wow. Yeah, so on this last trip, I actually was exactly where that scene takes place, which I had never been before. So I went, part of this tour, we went on a cultural exchange tour, they call them. That's the only way that we can get into the country now legally. And as a matter of fact, Matthew Wasserman over there is sending people to Cuba through those tours. So if you guys want to go, that's the girl to talk to. Anyway, so we went, and part of the tour was that we went to the presidential palace. And so I got to stand exactly where that scene took place, which I had only been able before to do through my imagination. And I was able to look up at the window where I saw that man. And so that was really amazing. And part of the reason there are sandbags in the windows is that there has been an attempt to kill the president by students from the university. And it was a total bloodbath. I mean, the students were all murdered. And the bullet holes are still there all over the marble staircase. I was able actually to put my finger into the bullet holes that I had written about. So,
Wow. Men with
I know, my
fingers
life.
and holes.
I know. There I go.
Can I use my outside voice? Oh, can I really say that?
Betty Works Blue.
Yeah. So, how are you doing on time?
Okay.
We're
Couple
good?
more questions.
Okay. Well, let's see.
I forget
you-
I'm not in charge.
That's all right.
All right.
So, you are self-published,
Yes.
and it's Cuban Heel Press. So, can
Yeah.
you first remind me what a Cuban heel is?
A Cuban heel is a type of heel that was popular in the 1940s. It's actually a heel that women feel comfortable wearing to go out dancing. Does anybody remember the Cuban heel? You do? Okay. So,
I should buy some.
your mom had, so it was earlier, so it's like, yeah. So, so I just remember that, and I Love Lucy, whenever Lucy got mad at Ricky, she would go, you Cuban heel, you.
Does
And
Mark
so,
call you that?
no, Mark doesn't call me a Cuban heel.
He will
So
now. He'll
I
start
just
now.
thought that would be like a cool thing to call the press. So I self-published because I made a lot of mistakes with this book. I made 9 years worth of mistakes. For example, I was so anxious after Tomorrow They Will Kiss was published that I really wanted to have another book published right away. And so I let the manuscript go out too soon, back when it was 840 pages and the first 100 pages didn't work. And it was rejected. It was rejected by everybody of note, right? The big publishers. So I couldn't go back to them. So the only other choice when I finally got it to where it is now, which I'm very proud of what it is now, those people were not going to read it. And so my only option was to go to university presses or self-published. And I thought, if I go to a university press, there's nothing in it for me. I mean, we went to university presses before self-publishing became so available to us, because they were our only option to get our books out. And I love university presses, and God bless them. But this way, I felt like I had more control. And it was something that I also wanted to experiment with. My friend George Snyder, who was our guest last year here, had self-published several books, and I was very encouraged by the success that he'd had. So I went that way, and there it is.
So, Eduardo Santiago,
Yeah.
what's next?
All right. So this is the last question, right?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So I didn't know that this was so uncomfortable. I put 30 people through this. And, 29. All right. I have a first draft of a novel that I really like. It's called The Weight of My Shadow, and it's about two brothers in the 1970s, kind of based on my own experiences, but it's totally fiction. It's basically about one brother who is very much a traditional Cuban teenager, although living in the States, and his brother who is more of an Americanized, as we call them in our, he's Americanized, and how, in a way, the brothers are going to represent what I always write about. Those two brothers are going to represent Cuba and the States, and the difficult relationship that we have with each other, even though we're so incredibly linked. I mean, there's just no way to separate the two countries. I mean, you send the terrorists to Guantanamo. It's over. We're like a bed and breakfast for you guys. So that's what I'm working on now. I have a lot of work to do on it, and but I really like it so far.
And I understand there's maybe some sort of writing retreat going on up here?
Yes. When I started the author series, I didn't really know what I had in mind. I just knew that I liked talking to writers, that they were willing to come up, and that you guys were showing up and we're having a good time. And the more that went on, the more that those writers were telling me, when we're up here, we feel like we're like at Squaw Valley, which is famous for its writing retreats and all this kind of stuff, and that I perhaps should start doing that. But it was a lot of work at the time to consider. But Rodney Williams from the Strawberry Creek Inn has decided to have a series of retreats, and he asked me to do one that's from August 25th through the 29th. where I basically teach beginning novel writing and memoir writing. So basically, it's for people who have a book in their heads and they don't know how to get started. I guess I'm the guy to do it. I can get you started. That seems to be my superpower. I mean, I love writers, and I know what it feels like to have a book in your heart that you want to put out. So I very much get involved with helping people make that dream a reality. I cannot make it a bestseller, but I can make it a book. So,
like, I'm going to be taking it. Not only am I not a writer, I'm petrified of writing.
yeah, you're going to write a memoir.
I am? Okay. I'm kind of disgusted, but so what I'm hearing from you, though, is like you don't have to be experienced. Just like, I have this idea, and then you show up.
Just show up with a song in your heart, and we'll take it from there. You know, we're going to go through all the elements of good writing and of fiction, and in a workshop setting, and I can't wait. I mean, it's going to be a lot of fun.
It
You
is.
know? So from like 9 till probably around 2 is instruction, and then after that you get free time to write, and then when you come back the next day, then we workshop what you have written and stuff like that. So that's what you're in for.
And there are flyers back there, I
there
do
are
believe.
flyers back there if any of
So
you guys are
anybody's
interested.
And there's a local discount, I understand.
But of course,
Of course there is.
what's the local discount, Bill? 10%?
10% usually, right?
Okay. I turn to Bill for all answers.
So yeah,
Oh, Q&A.
now we're open for questions.